So sorry again for being a little bit late today, and sorry also for wearing a mask today, especially actually a friend of mine, a German colleague, a specialist in tsunami and earthquake, and also a colleague in Kyoto University. He got COVID in Brest 2 weeks ago, and then he has to extend his voyage in Paris for 10 days more. So in order not to influence my own trip, that I will return to Japan next week very soon, so I just wear my mask today, and sorry. I just continue my teaching and also our discussion last week and repeat a little bit. Last week, we read Retrouvez translation of the Hanshu as well as the note 298, and we introduced the two attestations of Kangju even before the return of Zhang Qian in 126 or 125 back to China. So we have discussed Seufer and German sinologist translation of one of it and Hervé's French translation of the other, and combined it with Kuwabala's timeline of Zhang Qian's mission in China, which was longer than 30 years. So that is what we have discussed basically last week, and I also comment how Yu Taishan date these two sources in his revised edition of Saka, his history of Saka people. So let's just read again very briefly about the first text, but I won't repeat the Seufer's German translation and my French translation again. Just remind you that here for the date I used the last version of the Dynasty du Qing Han, published in 2017 by our French colleague. And also I compared last week the 3 different translations by Seufer and by, my temporary translation based on Seufer into French, and also Yu Taishan, in order to show how actually Yu Taishan adopted this kind of view actually from Seufer, a sinologist in Hamburg, but published his thesis in Berlin. Then I also mentioned that for this key passage in test 1, the question is that in that time we note Yelang in southwestern China. It has been a very strong state around 135 BCE, but on the other hand, we don't know how strong it was with regard to Kangju, right? But we only know that perhaps around the 1st century BCE, Kangju has already become a very strong country, and with many soldiers as much or even more than the soldiers in Yelang in the southwest China, around today's Guizhou and Sichuan province. So I also mentioned that Kuwabala already noted this phenomenon that Kangju could become stronger from the time of Zhang Qian just to the 1st century BCE, that it just became maybe larger or stronger or have wider territory. The problem is how the Han Dynasty collected more precise data on the, Gazeta or geographical records of Kangju. So actually, on a seminar that I recently delivered at EHSS, I already tried to explain this important passage from the preface of Hanshu, and it could be punctuated in another way, but of course it's not very important, just for the convenience of your understanding, for the one who are not so familiar with Chinese. So we said that since the reign of the Emperor Xuan and Yuan, the Han Dynasty collect more data about the Western region. And here the phrase read that 其土地山川王侯户数道理远近相适矣. So their land, mountains and rivers, their kings, nobles, the number of their household, or the number of their kings, nobles, and households, and their distance. So literally, remoteness and closeness, as we have explained about the concept of hate last year, about highness and lowness actually means the hate. So their distance, according to the itinerary, have become accurate, literally detailed and true. So concerning the substantial geographical data in the chapter 19.6 of the Hanshu, Kuwabala think that most of them were collected around the Xuan and Yuan period, as it was stated in the Hanshu. On the other hand, Nagasawa think they are mostly collected after the death of Zhizhi, perhaps near the Talas, according to Shiratori's theory, right? And at the beginning of our seminar this semester, we introduced the content of the newly found Xuanquan wooden talus, as in particular, this very short scroll as the invoice of the kings from Kangji and king from Suxie or Sogdiane. So, in Bibo's opinion, she thinks that the Han Dynasty already know this kind of data, perhaps already before 39 BCE, but still there are almost more than 50 years or even almost 1 century that we don't know what happens with the Kangji in the northwest of China. And then text 2, I won't repeat Elwood's translation. Just remind you a little bit about how Yu Taishan changed his opinion and still hesitates in a little bit. But anyway, I just take one of it in a note of his recent work. Okay. So, I think an important point of our discussion in this semester that we must understand Yu Taishan's work as well as earlier works such as Shiratori's or Kuwabala's with the map in their days. So we used Franke's map in Kuwabala's collection, and last week we just go to this map, right? That if the final aim of Yuezhi that Zhang Qian wants to approach to was somehow around the northern Afghanistan and even farther to the south, then we know that he only arrived there around 129 BCE. And on the other hand, Tang Meng already started his mission to the southwest in 135 BCE, and that's where we found the first attestation of Kangji. And that means if Yu Taishan's view is correct, then the first Kangji envoys or merchants or any refugee already reached Han China before Zhang Qian returned to China. So the problem is how Zhang Qian moved just to Bactria during his first mission, and we agree each other that this question is not yet totally solved. But at any rate, if we still accepted Shiratori's view to locate the political center of Kangji between Chimkent and Turkestan, and this is also the solution of Podushkin, right? Then I think there's still much things to do in the future to locate the centers of Kangji together with the freshest data from archaeological context and philological ones. So these are we all show last week, and last week Franz also indicated that based on Elwood's comment, and I also think it very important that now I just correct my French translation of Franz's correction that, okay, the key expression is 重译 here, multipliant leurs interprètes pour demander à venir à la cour. if le front contre la terre offrir le présent, etc. Okay. The problem is that this kind of very flowery text, very flattery text found in Han Shu and composed by the great writer in the Xi Han, Western Han dynasty, Sima Xiangru, what was stated in Sima Xiangru's work was not necessarily true. As it was stated, in 133, there was a first expedition toward the Xiongnu, and then also another in later times and several times, but all of them could not said to be very successful. So actually there was no victory against Xiongnu, but still in Sima Xiangru's word, the Han emperor was very successful. So Everest's opinion is that son texte est donc hyperbolique, exaggerating, il correspond plus aux besoins de sa cause qu'à la réalité. Okay. Now let's go to another text that I could not finish last week, and I would like to call it the text 3. This is a 论都赋, namely an essay on the capital in the form of fu, written a bit later than 40 CE by Du Du, and collected in the biography of writer Wen Yuanzhuan in the Hou Han Shu. So this fu is usually translated as rhapsody in English, or rhapsody, or recitative in French, and according to the book of ballad that I just mentioned, it is typique de la poésie de Han, or rhyme prose. So you can also find some more, explanation of this fu on the more popular French website. For example, it was stated that the fu est une sorte de poème en prose d'une grande richesse de vocabulaire qui se caractérise par des phrases parallèles et des thèmes surtout descriptifs. So this is what we will read today. And last time I mentioned that it was composed after the usurper Wang Mang and during the reign of the founder of Eastern Han dynasty, the Guangwu Emperor. And that for the Eastern Han, the Guangwu Emperor just shifted the capital from Chang'an to the Luoyang in the east, and that's why it was called Eastern Han as a conventional name, or later Han. And it was in this context that Du Du was not so happy with this movement of capital. So in this rhapsody, he tried to make a very memorize the grandeur of the Western Han China, although it was not so historical or even a little bit anachronic. So last week, I said that why I chose this text, because according to a very important note in the 7th century, it is stated that here in this prose, but with a rhyme, the kanji is to be pronounced as the character qu, literally the canal or water ditches. And in this way, it could have the same rhyme as qi. So here I provide the Old Chinese or the Chinois archaic by Calgren, and this is the early Middle Chinese by Pouilly-Blanc. So in the case that if it is to be spatially pronounced as the character of qu here, just in this kind of prose, but actually a spatial record on how one should pronounce kanji, just as we don't call kucha, qiuzi as guizi, but qiuzi. Many of them have spatial pronunciation concerning the toponyms or proper names in the Western regions. So here, if we adopt qu, then you see how it could be compared with qi. So if we believe this comment in the Tang dynasty, then we should not give the pinyin of kanji as it is now usually accepted, but kangqu. Okay, then I just read this verse very quickly to give you an impression of what are the rhymes within this classical Chinese, but in Mandarin. But I will provide some old Chinese later. So the most important, semi-verse, semi-prose start from here. 烧鸡掌，济恶之，樊康居，挥征旗，追鸣笛，丁陆里，持坑岸 or 持抗岸，霍昆弥 here 昆弥 is the ruler of Wuzhen. 鲁肃真 or 速度 perhaps Sogdians, 驱骡驴，御宛马 or 御渊马，边绝蹄，拓地万里，威震八荒，诏至四郡，据守敦煌。So last time I mentioned in the last 1 minute that here Sudu, if we again believe this notice, actually this is the note of on the whole Hanshu compiled and not compiled but written by the Crown Prince Li Xian, the sixth son of the Li Zhi and also the second son of the Wu Empress. Then here this very rare term must be understood as Sogdians. Last time I already explained just very briefly that how he gave this note, just orally, that in a kind of dialect, dictionary of dialect in Li Xian's day, Zhen here, the second character, usually it means the one who rides a horse, doing horse husbandry. And in another dictionary in his days, it is noted that this Zhen is to be pronounced the same as the character Zhen, but there was already no character, the first character, in all the dictionary available in his days. But for a known reason, all the scholars who are specialized in the Hou Hanshu always pronounce these two characters as Sudu and explain them as the name of Western countries. And it was so taught, and himself, Li Xian, did not understand why it became this way, but they just know that it must to be pronounced the same as Sudu. And now Li Xian expressed his own opinion that now there is a state of Sute, perhaps it corresponds to the same country. So far, I do not know any modern specialist in Sogdian language or culture ever indicate this note. But it was Shen Zengzhi, a sinologist in the Qing period of China, but will live longer to the Mingguo period, that he already paid attention to this Li Xian note, and he identified this Sudu with Sute, Sogdian, and further equate it with Sogdian Sute in Weilue, the annals of the Cao Wei in around the Third Dynasty. Therefore, Shen Zengzhi said that, according to this note by Li Xian, the Sogdian has established some communications with China as early as the beginning of the Eastern Han Dynasty. Okay, and this note was further very recently noticed by one of my colleagues in Shanghai, Xu Quanshen, and also a former postdoc of Rongxinjiang, I think, in his compilation of the historical and geographical essays by Shen Zengzhi, just published in Shanghai 3 years ago. Okay, then let's return to a more fuller text of Li's Lun Du Fu. It first began with a very long introduction without rhyme, so just a prose. So I just gave a very rough translation. Actually, I did not have much time to do with it, so please tolerate this very imperfect translation. So in that time, given the surplus saving of the imperial treasury, the emperor started to develop his idea or plan of territorial expansion. And then there is a small paragraph of verse, 岁命标记请认为清 in calligraph 清 or 清 永为阴阳均如流星 in sing or sing 深知匈奴 and 割裂王庭 王庭 is the order of the 匈奴 and in calligraph it would be pronounced as ding and by polyglot ding and I will translate them later. Then again, a kind of introduction or bridge to a next paragraph that I just translate. Lei, or the Chinese troop, divided the state of Chanyu in the north, or the Xiongnu Empire was divided into the state of 5 Chanyus, and then the Chinese troops massacred 100 Bavarian peoples in the south and made them disintegrated. If again that you accept my very rough translation, I just provide here. So he, the emperor, nominated Huo Qubing as the Piaoji or Biaoji general and appointed Wei Qing as the great general. So actually in this phrase, the Du Du, the writer, omit many things that was famous or well known in his day that they know who are these generals and what are their titles. And their audacity was like eagles stretching their wings, and their troops were like shooting stars. They penetrated deeply into the state of Xiongnu and then split its order. And here is the verse that I just read for you. But let's start from a more easier one. That here you see, again, there is a concluding verse of this part, concluding phrase, which is bridged to the next paragraph of another verse. And I will translate the first, here, 御完马. So the Western Han troops, or those generals, drove horses of Dayuan or Dawan, Fergana, and Bian Jueti, they whipped Jueti 5 horses from the north. 拓地万里, 威震八荒, the Western Han extended the territory as far as 10,000 li, and 威震八荒, the imperial power thundered the wild land in the 8 directions. Then it started to establish 4 commanderies in Hexi corridor. So 4 commanderies, 4 jun here. We explained the concept of commandery in our previous seminars. And then 据守敦煌, its boundary was guarded by the commander of Dunhuang. Here you see that Huang is observe the rhyme of this here. And then again, Huang, but perhaps Wang in early Middle Chinese or calligraph. This actually means a sounded but aspirated consonant. Okay. And then for Qi, there is no reconstruction by calligraph, but polyblank is reconstructed as day. And here Li is you see lake or Li. So in this case, you see this T and Li. For their ancient pronunciation is similar but not totally identical. But on the other hand, this Huang and Wang is very good, very perfect. The problem is that, as we tried to explain last year about the construction of Chinese, that I fortunately have the consent from Professor Lohong Sagat, because I followed his course in 2006 and still kept my note. So, calligraphy, Old Chinese or so-called Chinois archaic, is as old as the period around 5th century BCE or even earlier. And on the other hand, the medieval Chinese or the Chinois medieval in calligraphy theory is as late as 7th century or even later. That means we just don't know at all how it was transited from this Old Chinese to medieval Chinese around the Eastern Han dynasty. Also, there are more recent studies by Kovling or others concerning the northwestern dialect of ancient and medieval Chinese, but I think many questions are not yet solved. So this is the problem, and indeed this is the period that we are treating right now concerning the 论都府by Du Du. And even if we combine with Pouleyblanc's own scheme, then you see that from the EMC that I use from his book and Calligran's Chinois archaic or Old Chinese here, this is just a questionable period that many things about the rhyme has to be solved. So theoretically, we must collect all kinds of data, including the modern Chinese dialect, as well as the pronunciation in some related language greatly influenced by Chinese, such as Japanese, Korean, or Vietnamese, etc. And on the other hand, also Qie Yun, an important dictionary in 7th century. And on the other hand, this is how Calligran reconstructed his Old Chinese based on the rhyme of Shijing, a very classical but archaic work of letters and other things. But still, we need to know this, and this is what we have to solve from other, for example, unearthed and newly deciphered dead language such as Sogdian and Bactrian or even Tocharian. So I think this is an issue to be still explored in the future, and so far there is no definite answer for how could I reconstruct it. Those rhymelets, I just tried to demonstrate it in those phrases by Du Du. So let's go next. As I try to explain, so if we just made a very approximate solution that you just agree to receive this day and lay close but not the same right, then you see how this phrase was transformed from the previous verse to the next one. And also rhetorically, you see how parallel it is, and also the beauty of this Chinese letter, that all this 1 li, 10,000 li, or Ba Huang 8, the wild land in 8 orientation, and Si Jun 4 commentary. These are all parallel terms. Then we just go to another key paragraph within this phrase, and I already explained this note by the Crown Prince a little bit, so I won't repeat. But if we look it a little bit closer, then I would translate these 4 phrases as they burnt tents of exotic carpets, usually means Persian or Parthian or Bactrian carpets, or carpets from the Southwest Asia, and fastened the Yanzhi or Ezhi, namely you can say the queen of the Xiongnu. And they set Kangzhi on fire, and they incinerated their treasures and rare valuables. Here you see that also Zhang and Zhi is not of the same rhyme from the vocalic part, but actually they have very similar consonantal part. And this is also a trick in very usually seen in classical Chinese literature. And even so, in Pouleyblanc's reconstruction, he gave this as a retroflex, ch, and gave this zhi as ch. But actually, according to our last, study of linguistic data from Kuchian language or Tocharian B, I think it is safe to say that this zhang can also be pronounced as ch. Basically, they are the same. And why I could say that. It was first written, expressed in my dissertation thesis on the name of the Subashi in the north of Kucha or Zhililan. And we know that, since period, we know that there are many names of this same monastery just to the north of today's Kucha city. And if we just give polyblanks EMC by so many, to so many names, then you find it just a various tr or ch or ch in the Tang period, right? And this is where we found Subashi on the northern ring of today's Tarim Basin. And actually, I found that this name is to be equated with Chakraya, attested in the Kuchian document right now published, not published, kept in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, as well as several cave inscriptions inside the Subashi grottos. And already their attestation on the wall have been photographed by French expedition in a time of period. So here we know that it is just beyond any doubt that this church just present Chakraya, Cha, in Brahmi. And in addition, concerning their data in Sogdiane, Yoshida also confirmed that what Polyblanc reconstruct as Che actually could correspond to a foreign Che, for example, in Sogdian language. Just a break. So here I just quote a paragraph from St. William's paper, Bacteria or Bulk Variation on a Place Name. I think it was published in the memorial volume for Xavier Tremblay, right? Maybe? Yes. And here, Nicholas St. William, he just referred to the discovery by Yoshida that the affricate actually can correspond to a foreign, Sogdian Chi, because there is a safe attestation in a Sogdian contract on the sale of a slave in early 7th century that we also mentioned in last few weeks. And this is the first publication of this Sogdian contract collaborated by Yoshida Moriyasu and the Xinjiang Museum of China. And sorry that I didn't find a very good picture of it today, but here, just for your convenience, Yoshida just found that this Chang in Sogdian, spelled in Sogdian script, just correspond to Zhang in Chinese surname. And I think maybe we just also mentioned that 3 or 2 weeks ago, I said this Chuyak actually means Zhu Ye in Shatuo. So if my personal note for Adam Venkato is correct, then this Turkestan is not to understood as the Turkestan beyond the Pamir to the west, but the Turkestan within the China and somehow around Trufang and Donghuang, because we know very well that this Chuya can be, my identification with Zhu Ye just in early Middle Chinese Chuyak. And it is famous, well known to be the ruling clan or tribe of the Shatuo Tujue. Okay, then I think I have, solved that text to some degree, and then let's continue to the next paragraph. So, 追名笛丁路里池坑岸霍昆迷. And I just mark the rhyme with the color. And for your convenience, this is just a rough mark based on modern pronunciation of pinyin, because you say yi and mi and ti. But when we look further into the Old Chinese and early Middle Chinese, it is not so simple. For example, Carlgren, he did not provide the pronunciation of all these characters, so we just ignore them temporarily. if we only look for the polyblanc pronunciation, then you see that here it with a K at the end, but not the L's. And on the other hand, this mi is nye, and lü is lü. So actually this lü, donkey, could also be perceived as a part of rhyme in the whole verse. But at the end of this verse, it seems that our writer wants to somehow link the sounds back to the first, so they very close to take, but not the same. And it corresponds well to the Lu Li. Lu Li is the smaller king of the Xiongnu. Here, lei and dei, and it looks very good. And here is the problematic term Suzhen or Sudu. But normally, in Chinese classical literature, the rhyme on the the second, fourth, sixth, and eighth phrase are important. So it should be somehow observed rhyme, but not the ones in the odd numbers. So actually, this is not important concerning the rhyme pronunciation and also this part. Okay, and let's see my translation. They broke whistling arrows of the Chanyu by striking land. Actually, the first attestation of this striking arrows was in the statement about the Maodu Chanyu of the Xiongnu. It was a very old and very famous and powerful Chanyu in the empire of Xiongnu. But then they impaled the Lu Li king. So Lu Li king is a smaller king under the Chanyu, the top ruler of Xiongnu. So under the Chanyu of Xiongnu, there are 左右贤王, the wise kings in the left and right, and then the Lu Li king in the left and right. And then they wrote on depressed and highlands. Here, Kang is depressed land, An is highlands, and therefore they say the Kunmi or ruler of Wusun. But of course, there can be many explanations on this Kang and An. For example, if you find a different dictionary, some will tell you that this Kang can be a kind of a dungeon or a door or something, and An can be also, of course, translated or perceived as a lake shore, not necessarily a highlands. And then they captured Suzhen or Sudu, or Sogdiane perhaps, and then chased their mules, luo, and donkeys, lü. And Chinese armies drove horses of the Dayuan and also whipped Jueti, fine horses from the north of China. So all these descriptions are very mixed and quite vague, but if one wants to somehow find a historical statement closer to this kind of description, then maybe we can identify this Lu Li king as a Lu Li king of the right in the middle of the 1st century BCE, because a protectorate general of Xiongnu just punished by a Chinese army together with the Wusun army to the tent of the Lu Li king of the right. And for example, I don't find any good report on whether the Han Chinese army ever says the Kunmi, the ruler of Wusun, or not. But it seems that there was an important political, event, some crisis within the Wusun court around this period, and then somehow the protectorate general also punished a part of the betrayers. And then we don't know when it happens, but somehow it seems that if we just believe Li Xian's note in the 7th century, then it was roughly around perhaps the end of the Western Han dynasty or the beginning of the Eastern Han dynasty that at any rate Chinese people know what is Suzhen, and they are closely linked with the animal husbandry. Yes, please.
I would like to make a very few short comments.
Oui, bien sûr. Use the microphone.
On several points, including parts of the poem I have shown before. If really they are Sogdianes, my impression is that at that time, of course, the idea of a Chinese expedition to Sogdiane is not possible. And looking at this passage, let's chase their mules and donkeys out. My impression is rather that during the campaign, they fell over a caravan.
Possibly,
under
yes.
the caravan of Sogdianes.
Yes.
Possibly considered as allies of country. This is how I would give sense to it. Two mentions you made before. They set Kanku on fire and
Yes.
incinerated their treasure
Yes.
rare valuable.
Yes.
It doesn't really make sense because
Right.
you don't burn treasure, you take them.
Right.
So maybe
next time.
should be interpreted another way. There is absolutely no reason why
Yes.
they would have destroyed
Yes.
valuable treasures from the country. They would have taken them.
Yes, but I just try to translate them literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exotic carpets at some place.
I
You
think.
just mentioned before.
Yes. Just
This
give
is
me.
interesting.
Where is it? Right. No. Not here. Before.
Okay.
No, right.
You mentioned.
Just give me 1 minute.
You mentioned in the poem.
Oh, here. Yeah.
The burnt end of exotic carpets fastened. Yeah.
燕州二之
What
Queen of.
can be an exotic carpet in this context? If we look at the carpets found at Basilic, the Scythian grave, now dated later than before. Now it's considered 4th or 3rd century BC. Also, the carpets at Noin-Ula, which are actually contemporary with these episodes. There are Bactrian carpets. Some carpets were considered Achaemenid imports.
Yes.
But there is, I think only Paul has worked on this. There are some good reasons to think that Bactria was a center of carpet production.
Yes.
And they were particularly appreciated. And it might be that. But it's just a quick suggestion.
Yeah, indeed, I did not find any statement in the official Chinese annals that the Chinese army ever burned Kangju or any part of it. It may imply the punishment of Zhizhi Chanyu on the eastern border of Kangju.
Yes.
Perhaps tell us according to Shatoli.
And the Zhizhi Chanyu,
Yes.
the Chanyu actually can be expected to have Bactrian carpets. Because we know that at Noin-Ula is a Xiongnu reign, and they had Bactrian carpets.
Yes, I think it is possible theoretically. So then I think I can continue right now.
Yes, continue.
So then let's just continue to this very problematic 速读 or 速真. I already fully quote what was given by this crown prince Li Xian and died in 684, just 1 year after his father. So it is in Fangyan, a dictionary of Chinese dialect in his days, that Zhen is the one who is specialized in raising horses, and in another dictionary of Chinese characters, this difficult word is to be pronounced generally as Zhen or Qin. But in that vast dictionary of Chinese characters, there already lost these characters. But, I mean, all the specialists just pronounced conventionally these two characters as su du. So in calligraphy, suk duk, and in early Middle Chinese by polyblank sok duk, and the name of the Western countries. And Li Xian did not know how it could become that, but it's just a convention. But in Li Xian's opinion, he thinks it is just today, I mean in his days, the state of Su Te, Sogdiane, Sogdok.
It's unquestionable.
Okay.
Because the self-denomination of Sogdiane,
yes.
We know it's Survik, and it's extremely close to what we have here. I think in this case, there is no possible discussion. It's very clear.
Thank you. But unfortunately, Etienne is not here. Actually, I just prepared it for you and for Etienne, but well. So, yes, I think I just finished this text to most of them, and I won't just go deep into the literary value of this very flowery text. Yes, and let's see what I still have for this week, and just write maybe this part, but I'm sorry that I did not have time to. Where is the recorder of this slide? Today this slide is not recorded by another box. No. Okay. Then, so I don't think it is necessary now to fully translate it, Zhang Qian's report of the first mission. You can find parallel text in Shixian Hanshu. Just mention that. Here about how to pronounce Kangju. Already in the Shiji, that there are several commentary, also in the Tang Dynasty, in Suoyin Shiji, Suoyin Shiji Zhengyi, that they affirm Zhu is to be pronounced spatially as Chu. And also in this Shiji Zhengyi, if we just use this Fanqie pronunciation, then Zhu is to be spatially pronounced as a combination of Qi and Zhu. I mean the consonantal part of Qi and the vocalic part of Zhu, and that would produce a pinyin approximate as Chu. So not only Li Xian affirms that Kangzhi should be pronounced in a spatial way in his date, but also these two, at least these two other sources. Then the problem is how we can construct the ancient archaic language of Kangzhi people, but I think it will be an aim of our future study, not for today, right? Okay, so I think I just finished my part, and if Frantz, you want to give more about the context of Dawan or Fergana? Yes.
Yes, in the previous session, we have several times where we Chao-jung referred to the discussions in Japanese scholarship initiated by Shiratori, and then discussion between the Tokyo school and the Kyoto school about the location, the identification of the capitals of Taiwan, Fergana, mentioned in various contexts in the Hanshu. First, in the context of the first military expedition under Wu Ti in 110 or something like that, when they captured horses. It happens that there, and then subsequently the Hanshu. Some town, it's mentioned that Fergana, Taiwan, is a country with a thickly populated country with good horses and many towns, including big towns, and maybe one big town named under different names. I won't comment upon a recent proposal by Harry Falk that Daiwan is not exactly Fergana, because basically I don't think it is sant. Fergana, well, maybe some of you have been to Fergana. I have been many times. When you are in Fergana, you realize you are in Fergana. It's a very self-contained country with mountains all around. It has a very strong identity. Although today, actually, most of Fergana is in Uzbekistan, but some of it is in Tajikistan and some of it is in Kyrgyzstan. And Falk elaborates upon the fact that actually Fergana is now divided, so maybe in the past Taiwan was only the eastern part of Fergana, etc. But it's meaningless to build arguments upon the modern frontiers, which were established under Stalin and are completely arbitrary and don't correspond to a historical situation. I just want to say that at the moment, Japanese scholarship, and also I must say the Chinese scholarship with Yu Tai-shan, had no access to recent archaeological publications which can help solving the question of the location of the cities in Fergana. A good synthesis, not very recent, but still very good, in English, translated in English, was written by Gorbunova, who worked at the Hermitage. And very recently, two books appeared. One about northwestern Fergana, its capital city, Arsiket. And actually, the title is clear by that. Arsiket, capital of ancient Fergana. The author's view, and he has good arguments. Abdul Khaminan Abayev is a good friend of mine. And also another book by another friend of mine, Matt Babayev, about southeastern Fergana, Andijan, where he also proposes a candidate for the Fergana capital. I must say that these books are not available abroad. You can't find them on Amazon, you can't find them anywhere. But when you go to Fergana, they give them to you. That's how I managed to get hold of them. Okay. This Gorbunova's argument, when Taiwan is described in Chinese texts, three cities are mentioned. Ershi, it's a pinyin. Is it pinyin?
This is Giles weight, but I already changed it to pinyin for the title.
Okay, you put the pinyin. Ershi,
Yucheng, right?
And Guishan.
Yes.
So, Ershi is supposed to be the city of the famous horses on the bank of a river, and there is a suggestion, so it was probably closer to China, close to the mountain, and here she reproduces an argument by Bernstein that it could correspond to the site of Ming Tepe. And actually this is Matt Babayev's argument, which I'm going to show. From the archaeological point of view, it is possible. The site, 40 hectares in area, is the largest in Fergana. No, it's not true anymore. Arsiket is also 40 hectares. But 40 hectares, means for Central Asia at that time, it is quite substantial. Okay, but Ming Tepe unfortunately has been almost entirely destroyed. But this is a very convenient map published by Matt Babayev. A map which should be used in all discussions about the ancient topography of Fergana because it shows the irrigated areas. It shows the irrigated areas in the 1930s, so before the big works initiated under Stalin. So it corresponds to a historical situation. And you can see here that Ming Tepe, the candidate for Hershey, is very much in the southeast, so probably, well, close to the reach of the Chinese armies. But there are other cities, so in the view of Gorbunova, well, we have Yucheng is mentioned as being in the east of Taiwan. It was the first city reached by Li Kuangli's troop. Which expedition is it?
I just go back to my timeline. It's just after Zhang Qian's mission, and then the Wu Emperor sent his troops very quickly. So here is, where is our timeline? Here is the first Han invasion to Dayuan, but failed by Li Guangli here.
Okay.
And then again, Li Guangli led another but successful invasion.
Okay. But when was the successful mission which brought back Fergana horses?
It's just 102
Okay,
BC.
it's the same context.
Yes.
So apparently there is a city more to the east. Can you go back to my slide, to my map?
Right.
Well, it's very hypothetical, but here at Shorabashat, there is an important site, 70 hectares. I must mention that there are urban sites in Fergana before and after. There are some sites appear in the Iron Age, but here the discussion is narrowed to towns we know, fortified towns we know existed in the 1st century BC. Okay, so now so much for Yucheng, and for Kuishan, referred as the capital of Taiwan in the Hanchu. So apparently a third city. The idea is that it was Bernstein, a pioneer of the archaeology of Fergana, thought it was in the Namangan region. Gorbunova is not more precise. Then she goes on with this idea that it could have something to do with the Kushans and Yuechi.
Poulet Blanc's idea.
Poulet Blanc, yes. I don't think it's
because
convincing.
Poulet Blanc identified his Dayuan and Guishan to Sogdiane.
Yes,
according
but
to
his reasoning was purely philological. And what I have to say now is that we should look at the maps and we should look at the sites. And we have now near Namangan, where Bernstein proposed to locate Kuishan, quite in the last 20 years, a very large urban site has been excavated. It is Arsiket, the best known. This is Arsiket. See? In that period, it is a site 40 hectares. I was there. It's a very impressive site. You have a citadel here. No, the citadel is here. A walled city extended subsequently, Sharistan I, Sharistan II, and what they consider to be a craftsman's suburb. All that is the 1st century BC, 3rd to 1st century BC. So this city existed at the time of the first Chinese expeditions to Fergana. This is the map, see? Then it extended even more. But in this period, we can say it's citadel, RC1, RC1B, and RC2, the craftsman's suburb. As for the material culture, I was shown the ceramics, which is also published, but unfortunately there are no color photographs of pots
only for the far later periods, Islamic, etc. But I saw the ceramic. Bertillone saw the ceramic. It has some affinities with the ceramics at Samarkand, period Afrasiab II, Hellenistic period. Some affinities in the appearance. A red slip, some shapes, etc. But I wouldn't say that there are shapes which are definitely Hellenistic. Seems to be a certain cultural continuum with Sogdiane at the time of the Hellenistic period, but there is really no argument to consider that the Greeks went as far as Fergana. They went as far as Rogent. That we know. We know because the ancient citadel of Rogent, built of mud brick, is a Greek fortification. And for a long time, until very recently, the overall opinion is that Rogent was a foundation by Alexander, Alexandria Escate, the extreme Alexandria. Now, thanks to Pavel Lourier, but it was already discovered by some others before, from the toponym names surviving in the Islamic period, we know there was an Alexandria polis more to the west, in Zamin, and so this was probably Alexandria Escate, but anyhow, there was a Greek post here in Rogent, and I must add, near Rogent, there was a famous turquoise mine, and in the Greek levels at Samarkand, which my collaborators and I excavated, there is one kind of material which is typical of the Greek levels, not before, not after, bits of turquoise. So one of the functions of Samarkand at that time was probably to work turquoise imported from the limit of Fergana. But it doesn't mean that Greek power extended as far as Fergana. As far as I can say, no Greek coin has been found in Fergana. Of course, there are not many Greek coins in Sogdiane either. In Samarkand and around now we know about 60 coins. Nothing. So I must say that what I propose here is just an invitation to scholars working on Chinese texts to look more carefully at the present state of Fergana archaeology, because it can substantiate the discussions. I don't think we'll ever reach a final decision for the location, which site was which one. Perhaps there were sometimes two different names for one site, we don't know, but we can give more precise, we can narrow the focus of the hypothesis. Something else I would like to add today, still about the material culture, is a strange phenomenon which appears in the late Kangkyu period. For the early Kangkyu period, until the 1st century BC to 2nd century AD, it doesn't seem we have walled cities. There are many small sites, but basically the archaeology of Kangkyu for that time is a funerary archaeology, kurgans. It seems that most of the population probably kept a nomadic way of life. There is an exception in the very south of Kangkyu, in Chach, the site still known as Kanka, possibly a heritage of the name of Kankyu. And we discussed it with Chao-jung. It might be Yuenudi, the southern capital of Kankyu. Maybe there or somewhere else, or in the vicinity. Here, this big site appears apparently in the 1st century BC with a citadel and a walled city, and then it extends continuously. But I must add that the archaeologists working there are not in agreement between each other about the date of the early site. So it's possible that a urban site existed during the early period of Kankyu, but we are here just at the limit of Sogdiane. Okay. In Kankyu itself, we don't have anything very substantial before the 3rd, 4th century, when we see quite a number of small sites, all fortified, and with a very sophisticated architecture. And we have this same type of sites all over Kankyu. These from the Talas Valley to Bukhara, and even Fergana as such sites. Here it's in the Talas Valley. This site actually was excavated by a French expedition, was Rémy Bouchardlat. So that one shape, one type of site typical of this period, what they call the polylobed fortification. And it's very strange because it has underground structures, sort of long rooms, probably storerooms, but never could a superstructure be found. We just don't know what these platforms were carrying. So we have one here. This one is, quite similar. This is in Tashkent, okay, in Chach. A very fine example, bigger, in Bukhara, Setalak. So, when Russian archaeologists, Soviet archaeologists don't find an explanation for the site, usually they decide it is cultural. And so this, for a long time, this was the dominant opinion for this type of sites. Now I see in Yatsenko, they are moving towards the idea that these were just fortified sites. There is another type of site with 4 towers at the corner, and this type of site was eventually reproduced later on, from the 5th century onwards, in Sogdiane. And it is well known to our Japanese colleagues because it is Begram 3. At Begram 3, during possibly the pre-Turk period, maybe the time of the Nezak Shah, we have exactly the same type of site. It's not reproduced here, I reproduced it in one of my articles. So you see, it's also some variations. Here, Kreposti, Shashtepa, with this quadripartite within a round enclosure. It's very strange because in Sogdiane itself, we don't have such a sophisticated architecture. It looks more like the very geometrical architecture of Khwarezm in the preceding period. Some comparisons have also been drawn with mausoleums in the lower Sirdaria. So was it connected with an expansion of the Yansai people of the lower Sirdaria in that period? We lack a very precise chronology. This is the problem. This is in, excuse me, I think I had added a site in Fergana. No, it's not here, but it's not important. Excuse me, yeah. An interesting specimen. This site is within the political center of Kangkyu, according to the now dominant opinion of our Russian colleagues, and it was already Shiratori's opinion. The zone between the Aris Valley,
Yes.
Chimkent, and down to the west to the Sirdarya, Otrar, Turkestan, etc. That zone. There is the only kind of, would say, quasi-urban site excavated by your colleagues there is Kultobe near Turkestan. It starts in the second half of the 2nd century AD. They have a good chronology. And it goes until the 5th century. So it's typical late Kangkyu. And I wouldn't say it is Beitian. I wouldn't say it is the main capital of Kangkyu. But it is part of, it is in that zone. And you can see here an interesting combination. We have a quadrilobite site, which is obviously defensive, because it has, you see, arrow slits here. We don't know what is carried on the upper floor. Then a kind of sophisticated addition was built, again with geometric, two extensions on each side, then a craftsman zone, and here something which is going to reappear in the architecture of these zones very late. What is it? These are houses with courtyards, and in the middle of the courtyard there is a round base for a yurt. So typical of nomadic people who are moving towards a more settled life, but still want, in summer, to continue to live in their yurts. Or maybe in winter, because the yurts are especially comfortable in winter. We still have exactly the same thing in the 19th century in Khiva, in the palace of the Amir. In the middle of the courtyard, we have exactly the same kind of structure. And Henri-Paul Francfort reminded me that when in Afghanistan he saw some houses of, some farms of Uzbek people who had the same kind of structure in the middle of the courtyard. They lived, they spent summer in their tent and winter in the house. So this is typical for that. Well, an idea, well, I wonder whether at least some of the smaller quadrilobite structures were not meant to carry a yurt. The big yurt of a leader. So, well, nobody at the moment has proposed that, but we know that the Mongol yurts, for example, have a very strict orientation. The door has to side east, and everything is very ordered according to the directions of space. So maybe it's reflected in that kind of structure. At the moment, the question is open, but the main progress is that the cultic attribution is now abandoned. So, and anyhow, what kind of cult? Well, fire our colleagues write fire cults, but everywhere they find ashes and traces of fire, they tend to consider there was a fire cult. But actually, the truth is that we know nothing about the genuine religion of the Kangkyu. We later on, from the 4th century onwards, 5th century onwards, we have the Zoroastrian way of disposing of the dead spreading from Sogdiane to the north with ossuary deposits, etc., but not before. So we just don't know about their religion. So this is what can be said on the architecture of Kangkyu. And again, we cannot propose at the moment a precise historical model. Was it brought by some invaders? But it is strange to have the same kind of sophisticated architecture all over the territory of Kangkyu. So it seems to be a specific Kangkyu phenomenon. Also, where these sites the seats of the heads of major tribes, but some of them are very close to each other. In the Talas Valley, you have such sites at a distance of 10 to 20 kilometers from each other. So, okay, they might belong to different periods. So these questions are addressed in the book by Yatsenko. And I see for the first time, we have a lot of archaeological material to make reasonings on that. So to conclude, usually, Chao-jung and I had prepared some short comments about the possible linguistic affiliation of Kangkyu. At the moment, the results are frustrating because the only element we have for the language of Kangkyu is personal names transmitted by the Chinese. Well, these names are very few, maybe together 4, 5.
Actually, I want to omit this part because actually there are many details. For example, we always said about Le Yue Ni or just Yue Ni concerning one of center of Kangju, right? But Shiratori already in his paper explained that this Ni could be perhaps pronounced as Tok. If it could be Yue Tok, I agree. He has a reason. Then he just identified this Yue Tok as Yutok in Turkic language, some kind of a headquarters of tent. If we just manage all kind of things by spatial pronunciation of certain toponyms and personal names in Chinese text, we will never finish this in 1 year, must say for the next
There
year.
are some arguments to suppose that the Kangkyu language was a branch of the Iranian languages and maybe the so-called Sarmatian branch, which is a later variant of the Scythian language. Which arguments do we have? The text discussed last week by, and at the beginning of the present session by Chao-jung about the fact that between when Kangkyu sent envoys to China through the Xiongnu, several interpreters had to be used. So probably they spoke another language than the Xiongnu language, which is in itself not an easy topic. There is a statement in the Hanshu that from Fergana to Parthia and Sea, they understand each other. They speak various languages or dialects. Well, it can be translated in different ways, but basically they understand each other. So if they understood each other as far as Parthia, it is probable that they all spoke a variety of Iranian language. Another argument, the aristocratic onomastic of Sogdiana, discussed by Pavel Lourier in his Dictionary of Sogdian Proper Names. There is most names, most Sogdian proper names are Sogdian or Turkish. But some of them, especially among kings, seem to belong not to the Sogdian variety of Iranian language, but to a Sarmatian variety, what they call Pontic. Pontic. Why Pontic? Because the Sarmatian language is documented only from inscriptions in Greek on the Black Sea. And sometimes you find the same type of names there and among kings of Samarkand or aristocrats of Samarkand. Hence, Pavel Lourier's idea that these names might actually be Kankyu names. And the aristocracy of Sogdiana might have came from the Kankyu. The royal families were of Kankyu origin. So this is really all which can be said for the few names I can see in Chinese transcription look to me superficially as Iranian, but more work has to be done, especially as to the reconstruction of Old Chinese, Early Middle Chinese, etc.
Yes, actually a frequent audience of us here, Okihara Hitoshi, he is not here because he is presenting for himself and also on my behalf.
Who are you
Hirotoshi? Okihara Hitoshi. Yes, he is now speaking via Zoom on Leiden for a workshop of Tocharian Iranian that we report our result on the Chumshuki document. And Nicholas Sims-Williams is there physically, and there will be some other discussion about old Iranian language, if any, around this kind of history context.
So we look forward. Nick will be here.
Yes.
A last comment, but it's rather to finish on a comic note. It's about wild speculations around that episode, the famous episode in 38 BC.
Around
38 BC, when a Chinese army defeated the Xiongnu leader Jiji, who had escaped in Kankyu territory because it had been evicted from the throne by his brother, and the Kankyu gave him a territory, a border territory for himself, and from there Jiji became a thorn in the flesh for the Chinese because he lied, he campaigned against the Wusun, he tried to he sent an expedition to Fergana, and also he intrigued with the Kankyu, and at some time the Kankyu wanted to get rid of him. Anyhow, in 38 BC, he was a big expedition was launched against him, and it is quite clear it happened in the Talas Valley, at the border between Kankyu and Wusun, because at some time he threw Kankyu leaders into the river, and this river is, the name of the river corresponds to the Talas. So here it's Kashkadaria, but it is the Talas. Okay. He's supposed to have built a big enclosure. It took several years to people to build it. The problem is that archaeologically it has left nothing. The map of the region at that time shows only kurgans, and the rectangular patches actually are petroglyphs, engravings on cliffs. But there is no urban site at all. So when you look at the report in the Hanshu, it appears that it was not really a town, it was a nomadic enclosure. There was one earthen wall around, and then a wooden fence, and inside, well, there is mention of houses, palace, but nowhere is it written that they were built in brick. It's quite probable that all that was built in wood, and it was a kind of nomadic architecture. Anyhow, this is the reconstruction of the battle as it was attempted in the recent book by Christopher Baumer, the History of Central Asia, a 4 volumes book, very lavishly illustrated. Baumer conducted some archaeological missions near Khotan, but he's now persona non grata because he did not. He worked without a proper permit, but he has obviously important financial means at his disposal. He published this beautiful series of books. It's not scholarly a great achievement, but it includes a lot of images, good maps, and sometimes very impressive reconstructions. So this is the siege of the city of Jiji by the Chinese. And as you see, he shows Jiji as Jiji's town as a Chinese town, built of bricks, which does not correspond to what we have in the description in the Hanshu, nor to the archaeological reality. And here, a detail which has greatly excited scholars. It is said that Kangkyu, I think soldiers of Jiji, when defending the towns from the Chinese archers are here. And these are the soldiers of Jiji. So, we say Xiongnu soldiers, but living on Kangkyu territory.
Well, I think that Chinese soldier in a form of fish scale, right?
The fish scale is the Chinese soldiers.
Right.
The Chinese used the fish, what they call the fish scale formation. And you can see it here. It's what we are used to call la tortue, typical formation of Roman, typical defense tactic of Roman armies who cover themselves all over with their shields. And an eminent American sinologist, Homer Dubs, or British, in 1921, published a big article, a Roman city in China. And his idea was that there were former Roman soldiers or their descendants captured by the Parthians in 61 BC at the battle against Crassus. We know from Pliny that they were deported to the eastern border of the Parthian Empire, and even Margiana is mentioned, Merv is mentioned. So, Dub's idea is that somehow they managed to be captured by Central Asian tribes in battles against the Parthians, and eventually made their way to Chinese territory not far of the Talas Valley, where they were authorized to build a town. There is actually a town mentioned in Chinese sources in these regions called Tatsin, or a name like that. The name the Chinese gave to the Romans. to the Roman Empire. That's it, I think. Okay, so a Roman colony of former war prisoners on the western Chinese border, and they would have been, they would have served against Gigi. This theory has been refuted quite early, but I cannot find now by whom, but Etienne has the references. Another sinologist showed that this type of fish scale formation existed in China, and there is no reason to put Roman soldiers here. But what I want to show is how persistent such strange theories can be when you have the history and the legend, you print the legend. And this is what is done in Baumer's book, which unfortunately is going sometimes to be used as a reference book. And you still have the Roman soldiers of Crassus fighting against Gigi in front of a town which probably has absolutely nothing to do with the historical reality. So this is the end of our seminar for this year. There are questions we would have wished to treat, such as a detailed analysis of the contents of the Tongdian about this Kanku question, etc. But it will be done later. Our collaboration will continue later on, maybe in the form of invited lectures, maybe joint articles. And so this is research in progress, and which certainly does not end today. Thank you for having attended the seminar so regularly.